Let's jump right into this. When you find some embroideries you love, how do you take those from just embroideries to full-blown projects? You have to decide what you want to make first and then kind of reverse engineer it to get the results. I've made a lot of small embroidery projects for my friends over the years, but a project like this is going to take days, not hours, and in short, it's probably going to be for someone that I love. When you're deciding to make a bag of any kind, the first thing you need to decide is if you're going to buy a pattern or follow that you're going to follow, or if you're going to develop a pattern of your own to work off of. There are many bag patterns that you can find, and they certainly eliminate a little of the thinking when you plan out one that you need to do when you plan out one for yourself. If the bag that you're planning is not square, it would definitely be better for you to make a pattern first. And you can make a simple paper pattern. If you want to add additional features like a zipper or pockets, it's best to plan those in first so that you don't disrupt the outline of the bag by adding them in as an afterthought at a later date. If your bag is going to be squared off, you can just plan out your dimensions and cut accordingly. This is the plan that I followed. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more compulsive quilting and embroidery videos. Now let's move on to embroidery. There's no way to get around it. A bag this heavily embroidered is going to take days of work. I spent about 3 solid days working on these, and one of those days I was running 2 machines so that I could work on embroideries on the front and the back at the same time. Each row of birds was around 97,000 stitches. The 6 bird rows were reduced 50% and therefore were the same stitch count as the rows that had 3 birds at 100%. I found these embroideries at swackembroidery.com. The name of the pattern to search for is Jacobean Bird Set. All of the little birds I ran through my embroidery software and reduced to 2 inches. These were quite dense, and I recommend using a new sharp needle every day. I didn't fiddle with the design to combine the colors, and that turned out to be a good decision. The large ones at the center I left at full size, and I used a 360 by 350 hoop. Of course, these could have been done on a much smaller hoop and just repositioned for each bird. When you work with a 360 by 350 hoop, you're going to have to split the design, and these birds don't have a natural place to do the split. So I decided to put the row of birds on each side of the hoop and then come in on a 360 by 200 hoop and do the center birds on that one. So that way I wouldn't have to split the birds across their center. And this was a good plan, but a moment of inattention when setting up the hoop later came back to bite me. I'll get to that in a minute though. The machine seems to be running slow. I think that this was put into place either by the original design or by my software because I couldn't manually override the preset speed. This quite possibly has to do with the density of the stitches. The denser the stitches are, the better it is that you slow your machine down to avoid problems. On another note, this is how I deal with a badly stitched spot. It was the only place in any of the designs that messed up. So first I changed my needle, then I rethreaded and cleaned my machine, and then I ripped out the problem area. Then I restarted at the beginning of the color stop. Now about my work setup. I know some people like to position machines side by side, but I prefer to sit between them with a rolly chair and a little cart of threads. This way I can share my thread colors between the 2 designs. Since both of these are the same designs and they're working the same color pathway on the front and the back of the bag, I know that this will work for me. Now we'll come back to what happened to my carefully made plan about dropping part of the design that would be split into another hoop. I messed up. I was looking through my camera lens at a distance trying to film while setting up the embroidery, and I set my middle row going opposite directions from the other birds. I was not pleased. I had to walk away from my embroidery for a full day and think about if I wanted to chuck the full project and start over. So, with a little rest and a little distance, I came back to it. So for a couple of days, I was working on 2 embroideries at once. I was working on this one and this one.
This one does not have any noticeable mistakes in it. I pretty much am very happy with it. However, let me set this aside. This one has a major mistake. It actually had two things happen while I was embroidering it, and I was well into the design when these happened. The first thing that I noticed was my material had flipped over and sewn part of it, and I ended up actually tearing the fabric to get that out because I didn't want to mess up my embroidery. So since this is over at an edge, I wasn't going to worry about the hole right there, and I can cut that piece out. But the other thing is much more significant, and I had started out with a large hoop and then moved to a smaller hoop, and what I noticed after I had done these, which I wanted to sit right up against these pieces that had earlier been done. I was going to do another sequence here, but I've decided not to. In light of what's happened here, I'm going to have to make some cuts. So what happened here, and I can pull these off right now and show, because I'm going to have to cut this and fix it. I could not see these because they're obscured by the embroidery hoop, but they are running opposite direction. These are running opposite direction, and these are this way. So when I look at this, I'm like, oh no. And honestly, I wasn't even focused on my embroidery much. I was just changing threads as quick as I could because I was doing two of these at once. So about every 3 minutes on one or the other embroidery that I was working on, I would have to do that. Now, my plan for fixing this is, well, really, there is no fix. But I'm going to cut it apart right here. It's going to be a very careful cut because I want to keep both pieces of embroidery. What I'm looking at is probably 1/8 of an inch on either side is what I'm going to be able to get out of this. And then I'm going to take some from the outside and sew it in there so that I get enough that I can rotate this around and sew it back on. So I'm just going to have to be really, really careful with my cut to get about 1/8 of an inch of a seam allowance on either side that I can work with. When I'm working on fixing a problem I've created, I want to make it look like it's part of the original design choice. So as you can see, I've had very, very little small seams that I've had to work with on this side. Now I want to put in some quilting lines right along there, and this will make it look like it's more of my original design. So I'm going to quilt this. That adds a little bit of complexity to the bag because originally I had decided that I wanted just to bag my interior and I wasn't thinking about quilting. So it's a few more steps if you're quilting. So I've chose a fabric for the interior and I'll be using that on both pieces. So this is the fabric that I've used to quilt with on the back side, or it'll be the inside of the bag. And what you'll notice here is that I've cut off a 2 1/4 inch strip at the top. I've left, and that's only on the back side and the batting here. And I've left the stabilizer and I've left the front fabric on. And well, this one is at the back of the bag, but it's the facing fabric that you'll see. What I'm going for is this kind of look here. So this is the front of the bag, and I've already, when the fabric is folded over, this is what I'm doing. So I have a zipper placket here that I've cut, and that's what I cut the inside of the 2.5 inch strip for, was to make the zipper placket, and I had 2.5 inches of this strip of fabric here. So once I get this sewn in at the back, I'll sew it back in, so I've got it sewn in here. Then I'm going to turn in my, I'm going to lay the zipper placket back, and then I'm going to turn in my inside, or the outside fabric here. I'm just folding it over so that I have this much on this side, and this will give me room to open my bag. So here's where the bag is currently. I have used binding around to finish this part of the quilting here. And this was especially difficult. I've got to say that there were several times when I ended up hand finishing a piece, like across here and across here. And that is because my machine gave me a message that the presser foot was too high. So you might find yourself doing some hand sewing. I'm about to do a good bit of hand sewing on the outside of the bag because a lot of structure comes from these outside seams. These are on the inside, and that's actually just to cover this up. But you'll notice right here, the bag, when it stays open, it holds itself open, and that is because of these seams that are around the edge here. So I'm about to turn this inside out like this and start adding some exterior seams. And what I will do with these is I'll take some seams up, I'll bunch the fabric like this, and I'll take a seam up like this. And what this will do is add a little bit more structure that keeps the bag freestanding. The plan here is to place my seams outside of the panels that I've quilted. So I've quilted right here, and I'm just going to run my seam along that, and that's going to give these support structures a little bit more stability. So this is how this is going to look. I don't normally recommend putting all the pins here, but I wanted you to see how they are laid out, because you will stick yourself all over the place as you're working through this. You can see it also on this side. I want my exterior support seams to come right here, and I will also pin along the bottom eventually, but I'm going to pull these out right now while I'm working. So I used a sport zipper when I was deciding what kind of zipper, and it works well for this and opens and closes easily. And that's how I chose the zipper that went in it. I am still waiting on straps to come in the mail. So I haven't attached these from the outside. Let me pull this out for just a minute. A couple of things that you might want to consider when you're looking at straps is where to attach them on your fabric. Now I have a central, I have a the seam from the inside, the finished seam, running through here. So I'm just going to want to make sure that my strap, when I sew it, goes to the outside of that central seam, so that it won't bind up. I did have several needle strikes when I was sewing these seams, and that just, if you've ever had that happen, it just kind of makes you cringe, because if it doesn't break your needle immediately, it will certainly dull it so that you need to immediately change it. Maybe I'll go into needle strikes for just a minute as far as how to resolve some of the problems. The first problem that you might consider when you're looking at a needle strike has to do with, let me back up for a minute. So everything about when you're sewing your stitches is about pulling perfect tension. Now the places where you're likely to have needle strikes is when you come up and there's a super thickness of fabric. And so right here at the corners, that's a place where it's very likely that you'll have a needle strike, because the needle is very flexible and it will bend a little bit. And if your fabric pushes it to one side, it's going to bend, and then it's going to hit the strike plate that is below the needle. And that's what I'm talking about with a needle strike. So this can mess up your tension on your machine. And if you find that it's running funny after it has one, then you certainly want to get it to be serviced. And you might not be aware that it changes the timing of your machine. But your service person, if you've had needle strikes, you certainly want them to look at the timing when you send it in for a service. And if you find that something seems to be wrong with your timing, you want to send it in right away. When I measured out how big I wanted this to be, I basically, for my rectangle, took it off of the size of a laptop. So this is like a MacBook Pro, and I put it on there. And I thought, well, this is big enough that it can fit this. And you'll notice that I didn't put any pockets on the inside. I used to always do that because I would judge my purse by if the pockets served me well. But I started just dropping a purse organizer in. Now you have a lovely fabric on the inside, but a purse organizer can save a lot of time when you're sewing. And you'll notice you can still slip a laptop right on one side and then have access to your pockets where you can drop your wallets and stuff.
When my strap webbing came in, I measured out how long I wanted it to be, and then I turned it over and added a D-ring to it. Once I had the D-ring added, I started working on the bottom of the bag. I worked from the bottom to the top, and once I got to where my presser foot wouldn't work, then I would stop and hand sew. The reason that I cut the strap and looped it over the D-ring is so that I wasn't having to deal with handling the strap as well as the fabric from the bag while I was working. This just made it a little bit easier for me, but it would be perfectly acceptable not to cut that strap at all when you're working on one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more compulsive quilting and embroidery videos.